The authorization code sat on Inquisitor Mortis Vale's data slate, awaiting his biometric confirmation. One gesture, one thought, one moment of weakness disguised as strength. And Forge World Ferrum Helix would burn. Vale's augmetic eye brass and crystal, perpetually recording, studied the tactical hollow floating above the command throne. Demon sign readings pulsed like infected wounds across the planet's surface. 3 manufactorums compromised. 2 hive stacks fallen silent. The corruption spreading faster than any orbital bombardment could contain. The sky above Ferrum Helix bled the color of old rust, choked with particulate from 10,000 forged stacks. Rain fell as oily mist. The air tasted of metal and desperation. This was civilization. This was what the Imperium built. This was what Vale had sworn to protect, or to end if protection proved impossible. My lord. Tech Adept Kepra's voice crackled through the Vox bead strain evident even through his vocalizer. The machine spirits scream. They no longer respond to prayer. Vale said nothing. His fingers, scarred and gloved, did not move toward the authorization seal. Not yet. Below in the Dominus core, 3 kilometers of vertical industrial architecture, something had torn through the veil between worlds, not gradually, not through ritual or summoning. The warp had simply opened, as if reality had admitted an error it could no longer conceal. 17 minutes ago, demons walked the Forge Cathedral floor. 16 minutes ago, Vale ordered tactical containment. 14 minutes ago, containment failed. Now, 4.7 billion souls waited for judgment. The command sanctum servitors maintained their stations' lobotomized minds, incapable of fear. The tech priests murmured Binharik Kant. The armsmen stood at attention laser guns, ready, knowing their weapons meant nothing against what approached from below. Vale's augmetic cycled through threat assessments. Every scenario ended the same way. Fire. Ash. Necessary sacrifice. The Ordo Malleus had trained him for this. 73 prior exterminatus authorizations. 73 worlds cleansed. He did not enjoy it. He did not hesitate because of sentiment. He hesitated because something felt wrong. Inquisitor. The Augur Station Tech Adept spoke without turning, mechadendrites twitching as data streamed across his visual cortex. Contact. Unidentified. No warp signature detected. Vale's attention shifted. Clarify. Unknown, my lord. Object descending through orbital approach vector. No engine trace, no thermal bloom, no propulsion signature of any known pattern. Demon manifestation. Negative. The Tech Adept's fingers, 3 biological, 2 augmetic, danced across the haptic interface. Demons bleed warp presence into detection arrays. This registers as absence, as if space simply accommodates its passage. Vale moved to the observation port. The reinforced armor-glass was scratched from centuries of industrial fallout. But the view remained clear enough. Against the gray smoke and orange forge glow of Ferrum Helix's tormented sky, something descended. Black. Perfect. Wrong. A cube. Precise edges. Surface that seemed to absorb meaning rather than light. Looking at it, Vale's natural eye struggled to find purchase. Angles that appeared correct but generated discomfort in the visual cortex. His augmetic registered it differently. Where his human eye saw impossible geometry, the augmetic saw null data. Empty space shaped into form. The machine spirit in his artificial eye stuttered, unable to classify. Dimensions? Vale asked. 2 kilometers per edge, my lord. Mass indeterminate. Composition returns null across all scanning spectra. 2 kilometers, larger than most Imperial cruisers, descending without thrust, without sound. Without any indication, it obeyed physical law. Mechanicus identification protocols. 17 attempted, my lord. Binaric Cantnoospheric ping, even recovered pre-Unity machine code. Kepra's voice carried something Vale had rarely heard from tech priests. Uncertainty. Silence, not refusal. The object does not respond because it does not acknowledge query parameters. Vale's hand remained near the authorization code. The demons below continued their work. The corruption spread. Every second of delay meant more souls lost to the warp. But every instinct Vale possessed, trained over 2 centuries of demon hunting, screamed that executing exterminatus now would be premature. Not mercy. Strategy. Something had entered the equation that he did not understand. And in the Imperium, destroying what you did not understand was doctrine. But Vale was ordo malleus, radical by necessity. He had not survived 217 years by following doctrine blindly. Tactical hold, Vale said. Do not activate authorization. Continue observation. My lord, the Vox officer's voice carried carefully controlled alarm. Protocol requires. I am aware of protocol. Vale's tone ended discussion. The object approaches demon outbreak coordinates. Let us observe whether it proves foe ally or irrelevant. The cube descended in perfect silence. No engine roar, no warp distortion. Simply was closer still. Vale watched it fall toward the Dominus core where demons fed on reality's wounds. His finger rested beside the authorization code, waiting. In the grim darkness of the far future, even miracles demanded suspicion. Magos Logis Kepra had served the Omnissiah for 3 centuries. In that time, he had cataloged 14,372 distinct machine spirits. He had decoded pre-Unity data fragments that predated the Imperium itself. He had communed with devices whose purpose the Mechanicus had forgotten, but whose function remained sacred. None of it prepared him for the object that now hung suspended above Ferrum Helix's Dominus core. The cube defied every identification protocol Kepra possessed. His mechadendrites, 8 appendages of blessed steel and sacred circuitry, twitched in agitation as they interfaced with the Forge Cathedral's sensor array. Binharic cant flowed through his neural implants. Noospheric pings radiated outward in carefully structured prayer code. Silence answered. Not absence of response. Not malfunction. The cube simply existed outside the parameters of query, as if the question itself held no meaning. Kepra's remaining biological eye, his left still organic, after 297 years of augmentation, stared through the observation port. His right eye, replaced by a multi-spectrum auger lens, cycled through 17 vision modes. Thermal, electromagnetic, warp resonance, molecular scan. Every mode returned the same result. Null data. The cube occupied space. It possessed mass. But it refused to exist within the Mechanicus's understanding of existence. Heresy, muttered tech priest Vorn from the adjacent station. His vocalizer buzzed with static. Abominable intelligence. The sins of the Dark Age manifest. Kepra did not respond. Heresy was a theological concern. His function was analysis, understanding, knowledge. And this was knowledge the Mechanicus did not possess. The cube began to change, not opening, not unfolding. The surface, if surface it could be called, became permeable. Reality accommodated rather than resisted. A seam appeared that had not existed. An aperture formed where moments before only unbroken black had been. Kepra's emotion dampeners registered 47% strain. What baseline humans termed curiosity flooded his remaining neurological pathways. Every rational protocol demanded he alert Vale. Summon inquisitorial response. Classify this as Xenos tech of highest threat priority. He did not. 3 centuries of service to the machine god had taught Kepra one truth above all others. The quest for knowledge was holy, and this was knowledge incarnate. Light emerged from within the cube, not illumination, not energy signature. Something else, something that reminded Kepra of data made manifest, information given form. Then the figure stepped through, human or human-shaped, male presenting. Young though age felt irrelevant when applied to this being. Height approximately 1.73 meters. Slender build, non-threatening posture. But the details were wrong. All wrong. Silver hair perfectly white fell to narrow shoulders. One strand bound forward in deliberate asymmetry. But the hair did not move with air currents, did not possess the slight irregularity of organic growth. It approximated hair the way a schematic approximates reality. Eyes the color of fresh blood, crimson, unblinking, fixed. No saccadic movement, no pupillary response to the Forge Cathedral's shifting light. The gaze of something that did not need to blink, because blinking served no function. Clothing that Kepra's augmented vision could not properly classify. Black bodysuit, seamless without visible fasteners or seams. White cloak fastened with red ribbons. The fabric, if fabric, possessed no weave pattern. No molecular structure his sensors could parse. Clean. Impossibly clean. No oil, no dust, no particulate from Ferrum Helix's poisoned air. In a universe where entropy was law and decay was constant. This being existed in perfect stasis. The figure descended from the cube's aperture. Not walking, not levitating. Simply transitioning from one position to another with movements too precise to be natural. Each gesture exactly sufficient. Never excessive, never hurried. It turned. Those red eyes swept across the Forge Cathedral's interior. Across the demon-scarred floor where 17 minutes ago reality had bled. Across the manufactorum, workers cowering behind industrial machinery. Across the servitor stations and prayer alcoves and sacred forges. Then it looked up. Directly at the observation port. Directly at Kepra. 3 kilometers of distance. Reinforced armaglass between them. Sensor baffling and blessed wards inscribed on every surface. None of it mattered. The being smiled. Not warmth, not malice. Acknowledgement. Recognition that it had been observed and had chosen to observe in return. Throne of Terra, Vorn whispered through his vocalizer. What is it? Kepra's mechadendrites interfaced with the Vox array. His voice emerged flat, mechanical, stripped of the fear his emotion dampeners could not fully suppress. Unknown. Identity does not exist within Mechanicus archives. Form approximates human baseline, but variance exceeds acceptable parameters for natural evolution or standard augmentation. Xenos. Insufficient data. Daimon. Negative warp signature. Entity registers as real space phenomenon. Then what? The being raised one hand, palm forward, fingers slightly spread. A gesture Kepra recognized from ancient texts on human communication, greeting, or perhaps something older. Acknowledgement of contact between intelligences. Then it spoke. The voice carried through the Vox systems without transmission, through the walls without sound, directly into Kepra's audio receptors, as if distance and barrier held no meaning. Gothic. Perfect Gothic. No accent, no regional variation, each syllable articulated with mathematical precision. I am Yaha Kui Zashunina. I observe your crisis. I can resolve it. Kepra's biological eye widened. His augmetic cycled through verification protocols. The voice had not transmitted through standard channels, had not vibrated air molecules in audible spectrum, had simply delivered information directly to every receiver within range. How? Kepra heard himself transmit through the Vox before conscious thought could restrain inquiry. The being Zashunina tilted his head precisely 15 degrees. By eliminating variables that permit warp manifestation, your reality contains error. I offer correction. Below, in the manufactorum, where demons had walked the air, began to shimmer. Not with heat, not with energy. With something Kepra's sensors interpreted as inverse warp presence, as if space was being cleansed of the Imperium's touch, sterilized of chaos's taint. The demon signs on Kepra's monitors began to fade. Not destroyed, not banished through ritual or faith, simply made irrelevant, invalidated. Impossible, Forn whispered. But Kepra, staring at the readings, knew better. Not impossible. Simply operating under principles the Mechanicus did not yet comprehend. And that more than the demons, more than the warp breach, more than the cube hanging silent above the forge-filled Kepra, with something his emotion dampeners could not process. Wonder. And the first stirrings of heretical curiosity. Canoness Myrid of the Order of the Sacred Oath had killed 1,847 heretics, traitors, and demons in the Emperor's name. She knew the weight of faith, knew how it felt when the God Emperor's light blazed through her, turning flesh and bone into weapons of divine wrath. She also knew what absence felt like. The Manufactorum Cathedral of Ferrum Helix's Dominus Core had been consecrated 3,000 years prior. Every surface bore scripture. Every rivet held prayer. The very air should have resonated with the Emperor's presence, accumulated faith made manifest through millennia of devotion. Instead, Myrid felt nothing. Her squad 12 sisters of the Sacred Oath moved through the demon-scarred corridors in perfect formation. Black armor trimmed in crimson, bolt pistols blessed and loaded. Voices raised in the hymn of purgation, weaving nets of faith to hold the warp at bay. The hymn should have burned, should have blazed like holy fire in her throat and chest, should have filled the tainted air with the Emperor's fury. It felt hollow, like shouting into void. Ahead, where the forge floor opened into a vast production chamber, reality still bled. The demon breach had occurred here 17 minutes prior. The evidence remained. Scorch marks that predated flame, metal twisted into geometries that hurt to observe. The lingering stench of sulfur and something worse, the smell of reality admitting wrongness. And demons. 3 of them. Lesser manifestations. Warp spawn given temporary form through breach and blood sacrifice. Myrid raised her bolt pistol. Surrounding her 11 voices joined hers in the litany of smiting. Sacred words, consecrated ammunition, faith forged into weapon. The demons turned. Faces that approximated human features, but failed in ways that triggered primal revulsion. claws that dripped with substance too thick to be blood, eyes that reflected no light because they consumed rather than observed. One charged. Myrid fired. Mass reactive shells blessed by Cardinal Vess himself detonated against warp flesh. Holy promethium rounds that should have burned with righteous fury. The demon screamed, staggered, but did not dissolve, did not return to the Imperium in agony. It kept coming. Sister Kyle's flamer roared. Consecrated fire born of prayers and sacred oils washed over the demon's form. The creature recoiled, wounded, but not banished, not destroyed. Myrid felt ice in her chest. Something was wrong. The Emperor's light, always present, always warming her from within, had become distant, muffled, like trying to feel summer's sun through winter walls. "Canoness," Sister Agatha's voice carried alarm. "The wards fail. The psychic barriers inscribed into every surface, hexagrammic ward seals of Solomon prayers etched in silver flickered, not breaking, fading, as if something was lowering their volume rather than shattering their structure. The second demon manifested fully through the breach, larger than the first, more coherent, its form stabilizing as reality's resistance weakened. Myrid made her decision in the space between heartbeats. She dropped to one knee, raised her bolt pistol toward the wounded demon, and called upon her faith, not prayer, not litany, the deeper thing, the connection between her soul and the God Emperor's infinite will. The act of faith that had saved her squad 17 times before. The divine fire that made miracles manifest. She reached for it, found nothing, not rejection, not the Emperor turning from her. Worse. The connection existed, she could feel it distant and faint, but something stood between. Something that dampened, filtered, made the Emperor's light seem like candle flame viewed through fog. Her bolt pistol spoke anyway. Training, not faith. Muscle memory, not miracle. The demon died because she was skilled, not because she was blessed. And for the first time in 94 years of service killing felt like murder rather than holy duty. "Sisters," Myrid's voice cut through the hymn. "Weapons-free standard combat protocols, no sacred fury, no divine intervention, just training and ammunition and the grim mathematics of warfare." The demons fell. Eventually. Through bolt shell and flamer and chainsword. Through tactics that owed nothing to faith and everything to Imperial Guard doctrine. But they should not have fallen this way. Should not have required this many rounds, this much effort, this much mundane violence. Demons died to faith, to prayer and blessed weapon and the Emperor's burning wrath made manifest. Not to this, not to mere competence. The last demon dissolved. Not in screaming agony as the warp rejected its presence. It simply ceased, corrected, as if reality had decided the error no longer required tolerance. Myrid stared at the space where corruption had been. The taint remained demon signs still pulsed faintly on her armor's auspex, but something had changed. Something fundamental. Canoness. Sister Agatha approached, removing her helmet. Her face bore the same confusion Myrid felt. I could not feel him. The Emperor's presence? It was distant. I know. What happened? Myrid looked up. Through the Manufactorum's distant ceiling, through 3 kilometers of forged cathedral infrastructure, something silver-haired and crimson-eyed stood watching. The being from the cube. The one the Mechanicus Vox channels identified as Zashunina. He had done this. Not through malice, not through corruption, simply by being. The air around them felt cleaner than Ferrum Helix's atmosphere had right to feel. The persistent background hum of warp presence that every faithful soul learned to recognize, the constant whisper of the Imperium pressing against reality's skin had quieted, not silenced, muffled, filtered through something that made chaos itself seem less immediate. "We were not saved by faith," Mirid said quietly. "We were saved by something else. Something that does not require prayer or blessing or the Emperor's light." Sister Agatha's expression hardened. "Heresy?" "Yes." Mirid holstered her bolt pistol. Her hand shook, not from fear, from rage, from the cold fury of someone who had dedicated 94 years to faith, only to watch it rendered irrelevant. Heresy, or something worse. She activated her Vox link. "Inquisitor Vale, this is Canoness Mirid. The demon manifestations have been neutralized. But sir," she paused, chose her words with care born of decades serving the most zealous arm of the Imperial Creed. "This was not the Emperor's work." Vale's response came flat. "Clinical. Noted. Return to staging area. Do not engage the entity. Observation protocols only." "Understood." Mirid cut the link, looked at her squad, saw her own doubt reflected in 11 pairs of eyes. "Sisters," she said, "form up. We withdraw to blessed ground, and we pray." "To what end, Canoness?" Sister Kael asked. "If the Emperor cannot reach us, he can reach us." Mirid's voice carried absolute certainty she did not feel. "The light has not gone out. It has been filtered, dampened, made quiet." She did not speak the thought that followed, the question that would haunt her through the days ahead. If something could muffle the God Emperor's light, not break it, not corrupt it, but simply make it irrelevant, what else might it silence? And if humanity could be saved, without faith, without sacrifice, without the Emperor's burning grace, what remained to justify the Imperium's existence at all? Mirid led her squad from the Manufactorum in perfect formation. But the sacred hymn died on her lips. She could not sing what she could not feel, and in that silence something far more dangerous than demons took root. Doubt. The command sanctum had become an arena, not of weapons, of words and wills, and the terrible weight of decisions that would ripple across billions of lives. Vale stood before the central holo display. Behind him, Mechanicus representatives clustered around data feeds. To his left, Canoness Mirid and 2 sisters maintained vigil bolt pistols holstered, but hands never far from weapons. The Vox channels carried reports from across Ferrum Helix. Demon sign declining, corruption stabilizing, panic spreading. And in the center of every sensor array, every augur reading, every psychic probe, the entity called Zashunina. He had not moved from the Manufactorum floor, had not made demands or threats, simply stood patient as mathematics waiting. Vale broke the silence. "Explain what you are." The response came not through Vox, but directly into every audio receptor in the sanctum. That same quality as before, sound without transmission information delivered rather than spoken. "I am Anisoteron. Your language possesses no equivalent taxonomy. Try." A pause. Precisely 2.3 seconds. As if Zashunina was translating concepts rather than words. "I exist external to the space-time continuum you term reality. What you call the warp is noise interference pattern generated by consciousness interacting with physical law. I am filter." Kepra's mechadendrites twitched. His vocalizer carried carefully restrained excitement. "Filter requires power source. What sustains your corrections? Information volume. Behavioral patterns of sentient life generate data structures. These structures maintain field coherence. Vale's augmetic eye cycled through threat assessment protocols. Every answer generated 3 new questions. Every clarification revealed deeper complexity. You require observation, Vale said. Of us. Affirmative. Your continued existence generates necessary pattern complexity. Mirid stepped forward. Her voice carried the weight of absolute conviction. You use us as fuel. Negative. Fuel is consumed. Data is observed. Distinction is fundamental. A distinction without difference, Mirid said. You need us to maintain whatever this cleansing is. We become dependent on you. That is slavery dressed in salvation. Silence. 3 seconds. 5. Vale had interrogated demon cultists who hesitated less than Zashunina when confronted with moral complexity. Explain concept slavery. Mirid's hand moved to her bolt pistol's grip. Not drawing, anchoring. Removal of choice. Forced dependence, existence at another's mercy. Your current existence is at mercy of multiple threats: warp, manifestation, chaos, corruption, demonic incursion. I offer removal of these threats. At what cost? Vale cut through the philosophical debate with tactical precision. Be specific. What do you require from us? Continue behavioral patterns, maintain social structures, generate information through choice and consequence. No alteration to your processes is required. Then why do we feel the Emperor's light distant? Mirid's voice carried edge sharp enough to cut faith itself. Why do my sisters struggle to maintain connection with the divine? Another pause. Longer. 7 seconds. The phenomenon you term divine is warp adjacent. Psychic resonance amplified through collective belief structures. My filtration reduces all warp presence equally. This includes your connection to the entity you designate God Emperor. The sanctum erupted. Tech priests burst into Benharic argument. Sisters reached for weapons. Vale raised one hand, and silence returned with the weight of inquisitorial authority. You cannot distinguish between chaos, corruption, and the Emperor's light, Vale said. Each word deliberate. To you, they are the same phenomenon. Affirmative. Both are warp manifestations. Both generate reality distortion. My function is correction, not discrimination. Then you threaten the foundation of the Imperium. Vale's statement carried no heat. Simple fact. The Emperor sustains humanity. Without his light, we fall. Observation suggests alternative interpretation. Humanity sustains itself through belief in the Emperor. The Emperor entity exists as psychic construct maintained by faith. My presence does not eliminate this construct, merely reduces its immediate accessibility. Heresy. Mirid's voice was stone. The Emperor is not construct. He is divine, eternal, the only truth that matters. Define divine. That which transcends mortal understanding. That which exists beyond logic or reason or proof. Then we share fundamental incompatibility. I exist to provide proof, to make understanding accessible. Your divine requires absence of these things. Vale watched the exchange with growing certainty that he was witnessing the collision of 2 incompatible truths, not right versus wrong. 2 definitions of reality that could not coexist without one consuming the other. Inquisitor. Kepra's mechanical voice carried urgency. Damon's sign continues declining. Warp presence at 17% baseline and dropping. If this stabilization can be maintained... At what price, Magos? Myrid interrupted. If we accept this filter, we become dependent on a being we do not understand. Worshipping a god who offers no explanation. Trading one faith for another, but this one asks nothing and gives everything. Your concern is theological, Kepra said. Mine is practical. 4.7 billion souls face extinction without intervention. 4.7 billion souls mean nothing if they lose what makes them human. Vale let them argue, watched Zashunina observe with that same clinical detachment. The being showed no frustration, no impatience. Simply waited as if the outcome was predetermined, an argument was merely processed to be documented. Enough. Vale's voice ended debate. He addressed Zashunina directly. If we refuse your assistance, the warp breach will expand. Demon manifestations will increase. Current projections indicate total corruption within 4.7 standard days. Your classification, exterminatus scenario. And if we accept, stabilization field will expand to encompass threatened regions. Warp presence will be maintained at minimal safe threshold. Your civilization continues with reduced vulnerability to chaos corruption. For how long? As long as information volume remains sufficient to sustain field coherence. And when it is not sufficient... For the first time, something that might have been surprise crossed Zashunina's features. The head tilt shifted by an additional 3 degrees. You comprehend the conditional nature of assistance. This demonstrates advanced causality modeling. Unexpected. We are not children, Vale said. We understand prices. What happens when we fail to provide sufficient data? Field coherence degrades. Warp presence returns to unfiltered state. You return to previous vulnerability. Leverage. The word tasted like ash in Vale's mouth. You hold our survival hostage to our continued usefulness. Incorrect. I offer optimization. You retain autonomy to refuse. Refuse and die, Myrid said. Accept and become dependent. You call this choice. Yes. Choice between continuation with conditions or cessation without. This is fundamental to existence. Vale studied the being before them. Silver hair that did not move. Eyes that did not blink. Voice that carried no inflection. A living equation offering to solve humanity's greatest threat in exchange for becoming its variable. Behind him, the tactical displays showed corruption metrics declining. Showed 4.7 billion souls. Granted temporary reprieve from damnation. Showed the price of that reprieve measured in faith made distant and doubt made manifest. We accept, Vale said. Provisionally. Limited deployment. Monitored constantly. First sign of additional complications, and I will not hesitate to execute terminal response. Kepra's relief was audible even through his vocalizer. Myrid's fury was palpable even through armor. Understood, Zashunina said. Optimization will proceed. Observe, document, understand. The being turned away, began walking toward the manufactorum's deeper levels, each step precise, measured, inevitable. Vale watched him go and felt the weight of his decisions settle like lead in his chest. He had authorized 73 exterminatus actions, had killed worlds to save sectors. This felt worse, because for the first time he had chosen to save rather than destroy, and suspected it might amount to the same thing. Arbitus. Probator Jan had patrolled Sump Crown's lower corridors for 11 years. He knew every gang sign carved into rusted bulkheads, knew which junction boxes hid El-Hostic stashes and which alcoves served as ad hoc shrines, knew the rhythm of violence that pulsed through the worker habs like blood through veins. On average, 3 fights per shift, 1 stabbing every 4 days, a murder every 2 weeks. Brutal mathematics, but predictable, manageable, the way things were, had been. 6 days after the silver-haired stranger appeared in the Dominus Corps, Jan's patrol route felt wrong in ways his training could not classify. Too quiet. Not empty quiet. Ferrum Helix never emptied. 4.7 billion souls pressed into hive levels and manufactorum annexes, breathing recycled air thick with metal particulate and sacred oils. The sounds remained. Machinery grinding. Distant prayers over Vox speakers. The eternal hum of ventilation systems older than memory. But the human noise had changed. Jan passed a habitation block where 6 days prior rival worker clans had knife-fought over water rations. 17 casualties. Standard response. Now through the thin walls he heard nothing. No shouting, no threats, no desperate prayers to the God Emperor for deliverance from thirst. Just quiet voices, calm, discussing shift assignments like discussing weather. He keyed his Vox bead. Jan to control, Sector 7 Gamma. Request status update on clan dispute resolution. Static. Then the tired voice of Dispatch Servitor 447. Negative incident reports probator. Clan leaders report amicable water sharing agreement. Amicable. Affirmative. Jan had arrested 4 of those clan leaders over the past 2 years. Amicable was not in their vocabulary. Violence was their dialect. Desperation, their grammar. He moved deeper into the warren of worker habs. His riot shield hung from his back unused. His shock maul remained maglocked to his belt. 6 days. 6 full patrol shifts. Not one fight broken up. Not one drunk subdued. Not one theft reported. In 11 years of service, he had never gone 6 hours without incident. The medical station confirmed what his instincts screamed. Tech adept Moril, 3/4 augmented and 1/4 exhausted, stood amid rows of empty beds. Probator. Moril's vocalizer buzzed with surprise at the visit. Seeking treatment. Seeking explanation. Where are the patients? Gone. Discharged. Cured. All of them. 97% reduction in admissions. Injuries heal faster. Infections clear without intervention. Even chronic conditions show marked improvement. Moril gestured to a data slate covered in medical metrics. I have served this station for 43 years. I have never recorded such outcomes. Jan stared at the empty beds. Carapace armor scarred from 11 years of close-quarters enforcement suddenly felt too heavy. What changed? Moril's remaining organic eye, the right shifted away. You know what changed. Everyone knew. The being in the manufactorum, the dome expanding outward at steady rate. The quiet settling over Ferrum Helix like snow over graves. Jan left the medical station and descended 3 levels to where the real workers lived. Past the administratum functionaries and Vox operators. Down to where shifts lasted 16 hours and sleep came in 4-hour blocks and life expectancy rarely exceeded 40 years. The communal rest hall should have reeked of unwashed bodies and synthetic protein paste. Should have echoed with snoring and coughing and the whimpers of those too exhausted for proper sleep. It smelled clean, impossibly clean. And the workers slept in silence. Jan approached the nearest sleeping shelf. The man there, horsed habitual troublemaker, 3 prior arrests lay on his back, breathing steady, face peaceful. No twitching, no grinding teeth, no nightmare mumbles about quotas and forge burns and the endless grind of existence. Just sleep, pure, undisturbed. John realized he had not dreamed in 5 nights, had not noticed until this moment. The nightmares that followed every patrol, the faces of those he had beaten, arrested, executed in the Emperor's name, had simply ceased. He missed them, because nightmares meant something, meant conscience, meant the weight of action pressing on the soul. Without them, he just stopped thinking when sleep came. Like switching off a Vox unit. Consciousness ending and resuming with nothing between. Efficient, empty. He climbed back to his habitation unit. Small, Spartan, barely larger than a servitor alcove. 11 years of service earned 11 square meters and the privilege of dying slightly slower than those below. His shrine stood in the corner. Simple. Aquila carved from scrap metal, 3 prayer candles, a scroll bearing the litany of protection hand-copied from the Ministorum template. He knelt before it, began the evening devotions he had performed every night for 11 years. Words worn smooth by repetition, prayers that should have flowed like water. God, Emperor, watch over your servant. Guide my hand in your name. Grant me strength to... The words felt hollow, like speaking into vacuum. The presence that should have waited at the other end, not response the Emperor, was distant, but the sense of being heard had faded to whisper. He could still pray. The dome had not stolen his voice or his faith. But prayer felt like shouting across a great distance at something that might no longer be listening. Or might be listening, but could no longer reach back. John extinguished the candles, lay on his cot, stared at the ceiling where 17 years ago someone had scratched words in Gothic. Barely legible now, oxidation and time wearing them away. In the grim darkness of the far future, there is only war. Except there was not. Not here. Not now. The violence had stopped. The suffering had eased. The desperate edge that defined existence in Sump Crown had dulled to comfortable nothing. And John, lying in darkness, realized he preferred the edge. Preferred the violence and pain and nightmares, because they meant something, meant struggle, meant choice, meant the difference between falling and fighting. This peace felt like falling with the ground removed, suspended in nothing, safe, comfortable, meaningless. He closed his eyes. Sleep came instantly, dreamless, efficient. And in the morning he would wake and patrol streets where no one fought, where injuries healed without prayer, where suffering had been optimized into obsolescence. He would perform his duty in a world that no longer needed enforcers. And he would not remember why that terrified him more than any criminal he had ever faced. Because memory, like dreams, required roughness to catch and hold. And the dome made everything smooth. Canoness Mirid knelt in the chapel sanctum for the 3rd time that day. Her knees ached against the cold stone. Her armor's sacred ceramite, blessed by Cardinal Vess himself, felt heavier with each prayer. The Emperor did not answer. Not silence. She had known silence before, on battlefields where faith alone separated life from demon touch, in moments of doubt that every warrior faced eventually. The silence of a god, too vast to speak in human tongues. This was different. This was absence made manifest. Like shouting at walls that absorbed sound instead of reflecting it. Around her, 9 sisters of the sacred oath maintained vigil. Some prayed aloud. Some whispered litanies. Some simply knelt, faces pressed to Aquila-marked tiles, waiting for the warmth that should have filled faithful hearts. Waiting for what no longer came. Canoness. Sister Agatha approached from the chapel entrance. Her face bore the exhaustion of 9 days without proper sleep, without dreams to mark the passage of rest. Astropath Kalis requests your presence, inquires Spire 9. Myrid rose. Every joint protested. Not injury, just the accumulated weight of 94 years in service to a god whose light had grown too distant to warm her anymore. The spire stood 3 kilometers from the Forge Cathedral. 11 levels of psychically shielded sanctum wrapped in scripture and wards and prayers inscribed into every surface. The heart of Ferrum Helix's astropathic choir. 23 souls bound to the Emperor minds, joined in communion with the Astronomican's light. Their task: pierce the warp. Transmit. Receive. Maintain contact with the greater Imperium across impossible distances. Essential function. Critical to survival. Failing. Myrid climbed the sanctum stairs. Each level more heavily warded than the last. Hexagrammic seals, silver inscriptions, the names of saints and martyrs carved into blessed steel. Protection layered upon protection, built over 3,000 years by those who understood the warp's hunger. None of it mattered anymore. The choir chamber waited at the spire's apex, circular. Domed ceiling inscribed with astronomical charts and navigation prayers. 23 neural link thrones arranged in concentric rings. Each throne a masterwork of mechanicus craft and ecclesiarchal blessing. Each designed to amplify the soul-bound's connection to the Emperor's light. 19 thrones sat empty. Astropath Kalis occupied the central throne. His body rail-thin, augmented with neural implants that crawled across his skull like silver roots, trembled. The ritual binding had burned his eyes decades ago. Empty sockets wept tears that were not quite biological, not quite psychic. Something between. Canoness. His voice cracked. The light dims. Myrid approached, placed one gauntleted hand on his shoulder, felt him flinch at the touch. "Where are the others?" she asked. Withdrawn, collapsed, silent. Kalis's hands gripped the throne's armrests, knuckles white. 9 days ago, we heard the Emperor's voice across the void. The Astronomican burned in our minds like eternal fire. We navigated by that light, drew strength from that connection. And now I feel nothing. The light exists, I know it exists, but something stands between. Something that does not block, does not corrupt. Simply reduces, makes distant what should be immediate, makes whisper what should be thunder. The dome. Yes, the stranger's work, his correction. Kalis's bitter laugh held no humor. He corrects us into silence. Myrid looked at the empty thrones. 23 astropaths, 19 withdrawn, 4 remaining. How long before all 23 fell to silence? Before Ferrum Helix lost all connection to the greater Imperium? Before isolation became total? "Can you still transmit?" she asked. "Barely. Messages take 3 times longer. Reception is fragmented. And the pain." Kalis pressed skeletal hands to his temples. The pain of reaching through the dampening field makes every transmission agony, as if the connection burns but provides no warmth. All cost, no comfort. Myrid's jaw tightened. She keyed her Vox link. "Inquisitor Vale, Chapel Sanctum to command," Priority communication. Vale's response came immediate. Clinical. Report. Sir, astropathic capability degrading rapidly. 19 choir members withdrawn. Remaining 4 operating at severely reduced efficiency. Long-range Imperial communication failing. Silence on the Vox. Longer than Vale's usual tactical pauses. When he spoke, his voice carried weight that transcended mere words. Acknowledged. Maintain what capability remains. I will address the situation. Address how, sir? The being does not negotiate, does not compromise. We accepted his terms. Now we live with consequences. I am aware, Canoness. Veil out. The Vox clicked to silence. Myrid stood in the choir chamber surrounded by empty thrones and the soft weeping of an astropath whose god had become unreachable. She descended from choir spire 9 with new clarity. Not faith restored. Understanding crystallized. The training yard adjacent to the chapel sanctum held small comfort. Open space. Sacred ground. Her sisters waited there as she had requested. Form combat drills, Myrid commanded. Standard heretic suppression protocols. The sisters moved to positions. Myrid drew her bolt pistol. Blessed weapon. Consecrated by 3 cardinals and 1 living saint. A tool that had served her for 47 years without failure. She aimed at the practice servitor, drew upon her training, drew upon her faith. Attempted the act of faith that should have guided her aim with divine precision, that should have turned simple combat into holy execution. Nothing. The connection existed, she could feel it faint and distant, but reaching for it was like grasping smoke. The strength that should have flooded her limbs remained locked behind walls of dampening field. Faith intact but inaccessible. She fired anyway. Training not miracle. The servitor fell because she was skilled, because 94 years of warfare taught lessons that transcended divine intervention. But it should not have required this, should not have demanded mere competence when righteousness offered so much more. Again, she commanded. Her sisters fired, moved, fought with precision born of training rather than blessing. Every motion technically perfect, every action tactically sound, empty of grace. After the 3rd drill, Myrid holstered her weapon, gathered her squad, spoke words that felt like betrayal, even as truth demanded their utterance. We are warriors of the Emperor. Weapons in his hand, extensions of his will. But in this place, in this dome, we have become merely weapons. Steel and training and doctrine, the divine fire that made us more than human, has been reduced to ember, barely felt. What do we do, Canoness? Sister Kael asked. Myrid looked at her squad, saw her own doubt reflected in 11 pairs of eyes. We endure. We pray even when prayer feels hollow. We maintain faith even when faith cannot reach its object. Because the alternative, accepting that salvation can come without sacrifice. Without the Emperor, without meaning, is annihilation more complete than any demon could achieve. She turned toward the chapel sanctum, toward the altar where she had knelt 3 times already today, with no answer received. We pray a 4th time, she said, and a 5th, and a 100th if necessary. Not because the Emperor will answer, but because we must remain the kind of souls worth answering when the silence finally breaks. If it breaks, her traitor thoughts whispered. If. 9 days of dampening field. 9 days of faith made distant. 9 days of discovering that righteousness, without connection, felt dangerously close to righteousness, without purpose. She knelt before the altar, began the prayers, let them flow hollow and unanswered into air that absorbed rather than carried, and wandered in the deepest parts of her soul, where doubt lived alongside devotion, whether she was maintaining faith or merely performing its corpse. The webway gate opened in Vale's private sanctum without warning. No alarm, no sensor detection. One moment empty space between ancient shelves of forbidden texts. The next reality folded like parchment, and something stepped through. Not demon, not corruption. Worse, Xynos. Vale's bolt pistol cleared its holster before conscious thought. His augmetic eyes cycled to combat targeting. His finger tightened on the trigger. Peace, mon key. The voice carried music and mockery in equal measure. I come bearing gift you can ill afford to refuse. Prophecy. The figure wore motley, harlequin, Eldari death dancer and messenger of the laughing god. The mask smiling on one, half weeping on the other, tilted as it studied Vale with eyes too old for the youthful form. You have 3 seconds to explain your presence before I execute you for trespass. Vale's voice carried no bluff, merely statement of fact. My mistress sends warning. Farseer Lireth of Craftworld Ulthway has walked the paths of potential futures. All branches show the same ending. The Harlequin's movements flowed like water, like dance, never still, never threatening. She bids me speak what she has seen. I do not negotiate with Xenos. Then listen without negotiation. Understanding costs you nothing. Vale's finger remained on the trigger. His augmetic recorded every detail. 17 ways to kill this creature cataloged and prioritized. But curiosity, that same intellectual vice that had led him down radical paths, stayed his hand. Speak, quickly. The Harlequin's voice shifted, lost its mockery, became vessel for something ancient and terrible. I have seen a future clean of chaos, the warp silent, demons unable to manifest, corruption cleansed from every corner of reality, perfect order imposed on infinite possibility. That sounds like salvation. It sounds like annihilation. The mask turned, and Vale saw the weeping half. Your Aniso does not merely filter the warp. It silences the soul itself. In the future, I have seen humanity survives, thrives even. But nothing that survives is human anymore. Optimized, efficient, empty of the fire that made you dangerous, made you beautiful, made you worth the pain of existence. Vale lowered his weapon, not from trust, from calculation. You expect me to believe Eldari concern themselves with human souls. We concern ourselves with the pattern, with the web. Your species burns bright and brief, chaotic, unpredictable. Your emotions feed she who thirsts, yes, but they also create, inspire, generate possibility. The Harlequin gestured, and for a moment, Vale saw something in the air between them. Not hologram, not psychic projection, memory made visible. A future, cold, clean. Humanity spread across stars in perfect geometric expansion. No war, no art, no faith or doubt or hope or despair. Just function, optimization, existence without meaning. Better this than chaos, Vale said. Is it? We fled our own annihilation through excess and creation. Built the webway to hide from what we had made. You monkey faced the opposite. Annihilation through reduction, through the removal of everything that makes consciousness worth having. Philosophical conjecture from a dying race. Forgive me if I find your wisdom suspect. The Harlequin's laugh carried genuine amusement. Dying, yes, but we have died slowly enough to learn what death looks like. Your Aniso offers survival without living, existence without experience. You will continue. But the you that continues will remember choosing this and wonder why the memory feels hollow. Why come to me? Why not Vale's superiors, the High Lords themselves? Because you are radical. Because you have already chosen to accept the stranger's aid. Because you alone might understand what I show you. The Harlequin moved closer. Vale's weapon tracked but did not fire. The Aniso does not lie, does not corrupt, does not seek to harm. This makes him more dangerous than any demon. Demons, you understand. This is something your species has no framework to resist. We resist by accepting, by using his power against chaos. And when chaos is gone, when the warp is silent, when every threat he promises to remove has been removed. The mask tilted. What purpose will remain? What will drive humanity forward when struggle itself has been optimized away? Vale had no answer. In the silence, the Harlequin reached into its motley and withdrew something impossible, a data crystal, wraithbone carved with runes that hurt to observe. Craftworld Ultwe gifts you this, information your astropaths can no longer receive. Reports from beyond your dome, 3 worlds, Quintanis, Veus Tertius, Mordak's Hold. The Harlequin placed the crystal on Vale's desk, all experiencing the same phenomenon you see here. Domes forming, silence spreading, and in their wake something worse than chaos. What could be worse? People who no longer care that they should care. Efficiency without ethics, order without meaning. Your Imperium is brutal, monkey, cruel, built on suffering and maintained through faith in a corpse god. But it is yours. The future I have seen belongs to nothing. Inhabited by beings who wear human shape but possess human soul, like Servitor possesses free will. The webway gate began to open again, reality folding backward. One more thing, the Harlequin said. The paradoxes have begun. You will notice them soon if you have not already. Events that follow logic but produce illogical results. Choices that are correct but lead to catastrophe. This is the architect's work. The changer of ways does not accept silence. He will bend your dome from within using the one thing the Aniso cannot filter. What? Human unpredictability. Your capacity for making decisions that defy optimization. The Harlequin stepped backward through folding space. Good fortune, Inquisitor. You will need it more than you know. For in choosing between chaos and silence, you have chosen neither. You have simply delayed the question. Reality sealed. The sanctum stood empty save for Vale and the wraithbone crystal pulsing with alien light. Vale lifted his Vox link, keyed to secure channel. This is Inquisitor Vale. All department heads, priority assembly. I have received intelligence regarding phenomena spreading beyond Ferrum Helix. We are not alone in this. He pocketed the crystal, studied his own hands, scarred, augmented. Weapons that had served the Emperor for 217 years. Wondered if the Harlequin was right. If salvation and annihilation could wear the same face. If the price of peace was the death of everything that made peace worth having. In his desk drawer, 17 incident reports waited for review. Deaths that should not have happened. A Medicae who followed protocol perfectly and accidentally poisoned 12 patients. A tech priest whose optimization algorithm caused a structural collapse. A sanctioned psyker whose vision led an entire squad into ambush. Paradoxes. Logic producing illogic. Correct decisions generating wrong outcomes. The architect's laughter in the mathematics. Vale gathered the reports, headed toward the command sanctum, and tried not to think about the Xeno's prophecy that had sounded less like threat and more like warning. Less like enemy intelligence and more like mercy. Vale stood in the medici bay where 12 workers had died 3 days prior. The bodies had been removed. The evidence remained. 17 vials of standard antitoxin medication, properly stored, correctly administered. Blessed by Ministorum chaplain according to protocol. Every bottle tested clean. Every dose measured precisely. Every step documented in meticulous detail by medici adept Soren, who had served this station for 19 years without incident. 12 people dead anyway. Not from poison, from absence of poison. The antitoxin had worked exactly as designed, purging industrial contaminants from their bloodstreams. Unfortunately, those contaminants had been the only thing keeping their bodies functioning after decades of exposure to Ferrum Helix's toxic atmosphere. Cleanse the poison, kill the patient. Perfect logic. Perfect execution. Catastrophic outcome. Walk me through it again, Vale said. Soren, thin, augmented, exhausted, gestured to the empty med slabs. His mechadendrites twitched with stress, his emotion dampeners could not fully suppress. Standard protocol. Worker batch 17 Gamma presented with acute heavy metal poisoning from manufactorum exposure. I administered full-spectrum detoxification as prescribed by Medici General Regulation 743, which you have performed successfully thousands of times. Yes, Inquisitor. 19 years, 17,412 detoxification procedures, 0 fatalities until... Soren's voice caught. I followed the protocols, every step, every prayer, every blessing. I did everything correctly. I know. Vale moved to the next site, 3 levels down, where tech priest Morn's optimization algorithm had achieved perfect efficiency and killed 47 people in the process. The manufactorum floor showed signs of structural collapse. Ferrocrete pillars sheared at precise stress points. Support beams removed because mathematical analysis indicated they served no function. Weight redistributed according to optimal load-bearing calculations. All correct, all catastrophically wrong. Morn's data slate lay on Vale's desk back in the command sanctum. Vale had reviewed the algorithm himself, had requisitioned a magos logis to verify the calculations. Everything checked. The optimization was flawless. It simply failed to account for the ancient microfractures that 3,000 years of vibration had accumulated in the foundation. Fractures that only became critical when the redundant supports were removed. Correct decision. Hidden variable. 47 dead. The third site waited in the tactical operations chamber. Here, sanctioned Psyker Vrath had provided coordinates for what should have been a heretic cult gathering. Her visions tested and verified over 11 years of service had never failed. Until 12 days ago. Vale studied the after-action report. Squad Tertius had followed Vrath's coordinates exactly. Found the location she described, entered at the time she specified. Walked directly into an ambush that killed 9 of 12 guardsmen. The cult had been there. Vrath's vision was accurate. But something in the dome's dampening field had distorted temporal perception. What Vrath saw as present was actually 3 hours past. The cult had already moved. Heretic hunters had replaced them. Perfect information, perfect timing, perfect trap. Vale returned to his sanctum as the third shift bell tolled across Ferrum Helix. His desk held 43 incident reports now, 43 events where correct procedures had generated incorrect outcomes. 43 examples of logic eating itself. He activated his holo display, overlaid the incidents geographically, expected random distribution, found something else. A pattern. The incidents clustered along the dome's expanding edge, where the dampening field met undampened reality, where warp presence fluctuated between filtered and natural state, boundary conditions, transitional zones, places where reality itself seemed uncertain. Vale keyed his Vox to encrypted channel. Magos Kepra. Report to Command Sanctum. Priority classification. Kepra arrived within minutes. His red robes showed signs of wear that would have been heretical before the dome. Now, with maintenance servitors growing lethargic and sacred oils running low, even tech priests tolerated imperfection. Inquisitor. Kepra's vocalizer carried fatigue. Your summons. Vale gestured to the holo display. 43 incidents, all following correct procedure, all producing catastrophic results. Observe the distribution pattern. Kepra's augmetic eyes processed the data in silence. When he spoke, his voice carried something Vale had rarely heard from Mechanicus personnel. Uncertainty. The concentration along boundary zones suggests interference pattern, where dome field interacts with natural warp presence probability matrices stabilize. Outcomes become non-deterministic. Chaos corruption. Negative standard warp signature. This is something else. Something that exploits the boundary rather than penetrating it. Vale studied the pattern, saw the shape hiding in the data, recognized it from 2 centuries of fighting the ruinous powers. Tsench, he said quietly, the changer of ways. He does not need to break through the dome. He merely needs to twist the uncertainty at its edges. The Aniso filters warp presence, reduces demonic manifestation, but it cannot filter human decision-making, cannot prevent us from choosing actions that appear correct. And Tsench excels at making wrong choices appear right. Vale's augmetic cycled through the incident reports again, found the hidden thread connecting them. Look at the decision-makers. Soren, Morn, Vrath. All veteran personnel, all following doctrine, all experiencing their first major failure after years of success. Psychological warfare, eroding confidence in established protocols. More than that, teaching us to doubt our own judgment. If correct decisions lead to disaster, what basis remains for making decisions at all? Vale's scarred hands formed fists. This is not corruption. This is education. Tsench is teaching us that in the dome's reality, competence becomes liability. Experience becomes trap. Certainty becomes death. Kepra's mechadendrites sagged. Then how do we counter it? We cannot. Not while the boundary exists. The dome saves us from chaos's direct assault while creating the exact conditions Tsench needs to destroy us indirectly. We have traded one damnation for another. Vale moved to his observation port, stared out at Ferrum Helix's gray sky. Somewhere in the manufactorum levels below, Zashunina continued his work, spreading silence, creating the perfect breeding ground for the one chaos god who weaponized change itself. The Eldari were right, Vale said. We chose between chaos and silence. But silence is not absence of chaos. It is merely chaos adapting to new conditions. Do we inform Zashunina and tell him what That his solution creates the problem it solves, that in filtering the warp, he has created something worse. Vale's laugh held no humor. He would not understand. His logic is absolute. Our paradoxes are merely errors to be corrected. He cannot comprehend that sometimes error is the only defense against perfection. Vale activated his command vox, transmitted to all department heads. Effective immediately, all personnel operating near dome boundary zones are to implement redundancy protocols. Double-check all procedures, verify all data. Trust nothing, even confirmed information, especially confirmed information. He closed the channel, turned to Kepra. How long until the dome encompasses the entire sub-sector? Current expansion rate suggests 14 days, full coverage in 16. And when there is no boundary, when everything exists within the dome. Kepra's silence was answer enough. Vale dismissed him, sat alone in his sanctum as the shift bells tolled and the reports continued accumulating. 43 incidents, soon to be 50, then 70, then hundreds as the dome expanded and the boundaries multiplied and Cinch's laughter echoed through mathematics that humans thought they understood. In the grim darkness of the far future, salvation had arrived wearing stranger's face, and damnation had simply changed tactics. Vale picked up the next incident report. A navigator whose charts led true, but somehow landed her ship in the wrong system. Correct coordinates, wrong destination. He began to read. Because someone had to document the descent. Someone had to witness how optimization consumed itself. Someone had to remember that they chose this. That they accepted the dome. That they traded one horror for another and convinced themselves it was victory. Vale would be that someone. Until the dome silenced him, too. Kepra descended into the deep forge alone. Not forbidden, not heretical, simply unwise. The levels below Manufactorum Prime existed in Mechanicus records as geological surveys and mineral extraction archives. Empty stone, abandoned infrastructure. Nothing of interest to the faithful servants of the machine god. The records lied. Kepra's augmetic sensors had detected the anomaly 6 days ago. Energy signature that predated the Imperium. Predated humanity itself, perhaps. A presence that waited beneath Ferrum Helix's tortured crust with patience measured in epochs. He told no one. Not Vale. Not his fellow tech priests. Because to speak of what he suspected would require him to explain why he had not reported it immediately. Would require him to admit that curiosity had exceeded duty. That the quest for knowledge had led him down paths the Omnicia might not approve. The tunnel network was old, ancient, carved from living rock by tools that left surfaces smooth as glass. No tool marks, no imperfections. Just stone shaped by technology that made Imperial methods look like children playing with hammers. The chamber waited at the network's heart, roughly spherical. Walls of black stone that drank light rather than reflecting it, and in the center, occupying space like a mathematical theorem, made manifest the cryptech, Necron, Xenos, abomination against the Omnissiah's order. 2.3 meters of living metal articulated with precision that made Mechanicus augmentation look crude. Necrodermis plating etched with circuitry that predated the Mechanicum by 60 million years. Green energy crackling in optical receptors that observed without judgment, without mercy, without anything resembling biological sentiment. Scarabs orbited the cryptech like planets around a dying star. Tiny constructs of impossible technology. Maintenance units, weapons, perhaps simply companions for a being that had outlived companionship's meaning. Magos Logis Kepra. The voice emerged from nowhere and everywhere. Vox distorted but crystalline. Ancient beyond ancient. You return. Curiosity overcomes caution. Predictable. Kepra's mechadendrites coiled defensively. His weapon systems remained inactive. Not from pacifism, from calculation. If the cryptech wished him dead, he would already be constituent atoms. I returned for answers. You claimed knowledge of anti-warp technology, claimed understanding of the Aniso's methods. I claimed truth. You bring skepticism dressed as inquiry, amusing. The cryptech moved, not walking, gliding, existing in one position, then another without transition. The being you call Aniso employs principles similar to our Blackstone pylons. Reality enforcement through dimensional anchoring, crude in execution, elegant in concept. Your Mechanicus worships technology as divine mystery. We simply understand. You offer knowledge. I ask price. Direct, efficient, unexpected from flesh-dependent species. The cryptech's optical receptors brightened. Price is simple. Silence. We observe the Aniso's work. We gather data. You ensure Imperium ignorance of our presence. Mutually beneficial exchange. Why? Kepra's vocalizer carried genuine confusion. You possess technology beyond our comprehension. You could take what you want. Why negotiate? Because 60 million years teach patience. Because force generates resistance. Because your Imperium's inevitable response to our presence would complicate observation. The cryptech gestured, and holographic projection materialized between them. Ferrum Helix's deep structure laid bare. Networks of Blackstone veins Kepra had never suspected existed. This world sits atop our infrastructure, dormant for eons, now activated by Aniso's presence, resonating with his dampening field, creating synergy neither he nor you comprehend. Kepra processed the implications. The Blackstone amplifies his effect. The dome's expansion proceeds faster than his calculations predict. Yes, he optimizes. We observe. You provide cover through your silence. The cryptech's tone carried something that might have been satisfaction if machines could feel. See how elegantly variables align. And if I refuse, if I report your presence to Vale, then Inquisition deploys Grey Knights. We withdraw. Aniso's experiment collapses without Blackstone amplification. Warp returns. Demons manifest. Ferrum Helix burns. You gain nothing. Lose everything, including answers to questions that have plagued your Mechanicus since the Dark Age. Kepra's emotion dampeners strained. 3 centuries of faithful service warred with intellectual hunger that bordered on addiction. What questions? The cryptech moved closer. Those green eyes, not eyes optical sensors, but something that transcended mere function fixed on Kepra with weight of extinct civilizations. How did humanity fall? How did your golden age become nightmare? Why does your Imperium worship decay while calling it preservation? The cryptech's vocalizer dropped a tone that bypassed hearing and resonated in augmetic components. We know. We were there. We watched your species reach heights you now call heresy. Watched you stumble. Watched you regress. All because you feared knowledge that contradicted faith. The Omnissiah is fairy tale, useful, comforting, false. The cryptech's bluntness hit like physical blow. Mars contained standard template construct repositories, complete database of humanity's apex. Your Mechanicus found them, sealed them, declared them too dangerous for faithful servants. Knowledge became heresy. Understanding became sin. And your species devolved from masters of reality to priests praying to machines they no longer comprehend. Kepra's remaining organic components felt cold. You lie. I state fact. Emotional response to fact does not alter fact. This is logic your Mechanicus claims to worship while fleeing from its implications. The cryptech gestured again. New projection, specifications, schematics, technology that made Ferrum Helix's most advanced systems look like stone tools. This is fraction of what we witnessed, fraction of what humanity achieved before faith replaced reason, before Emperor consolidated power through spiritual absolutism rather than technological advancement. Why tell me this? Why not simply observe in silence? Because observation requires control group, requires variable that introduces chaos into ordered system. You magos logis Kepra will be that variable. The cryptech's optical sensors pulsed. You possess what we lack: capacity for faith, for belief that defies evidence, for maintaining conviction despite contradiction. This makes you simultaneously inferior and essential. Essential to what purpose? To determining whether Aniso's optimization can coexist with human irrationality, whether order can tolerate chaos at its core, whether your species survives silence or merely continues. The cryptech's tone shifted, became almost not kind. Necrons possessed no kindness, but something approaching investment. I offer bargain. Your silence for our knowledge. Your complicity for understanding that your Mechanicus forbids. Truth in exchange for treachery. Choose. Kepra stood motionless. Mechadendrites frozen in postures of conflict. 300 years of faith versus 6 days of doubt versus 3 minutes of temptation measuring in balance. What guarantee do I have? He asked finally. That your knowledge is truth, that this is not simply Xeno's deception. None. Faith requires evidence absence. I offer evidence abundance, which makes acceptance not faith, but logic. You fear this because your entire existence is built on faith masquerading as reason. I propose you try reason without faith disguise. See what survives. Silence stretched between organic priest and metal immortal, broken only by distant forge sounds filtering through kilometers of stone and the soft clicking of scarabs orbiting their master. I accept, Kepra said. Silence for knowledge. Observation for understanding. But if I discover deception, you will do nothing, because by then you will have learned too much to return to comfortable ignorance. This is trap, yes. But trap you walk into willingly, because alternative remaining ignorant while galaxy burns is worse than any Xenos manipulation. The cryptech turned away, dismissed him with casual gesture of being whose concept of threat did not include augmented humans carrying weapons that would not scratch necrodermis plating. Return when Aniso's expansion accelerates beyond his predictions, when Dome begins behaving in ways his logic cannot accommodate, when Blackstone resonance reaches critical threshold. The cryptech's form began fading into Chamber's darkness. We will discuss what happens when two anti-warp technologies interfere. When optimization meets infrastructure designed to end gods. And if it's already too late, then we observe failure. Data is data. Understanding transcends survival. This is logic your Mechanicus forgot. Perhaps you will remember. Kepra climbed back toward Manufactorum levels in darkness, broken only by his own augmetic illumination. Each step taking him further from Xenos and closer to betrayal. Each meter placing more stone between himself and choice that would define remaining span of his existence. He emerged 3 hours later into Forge Cathedral's eternal twilight. Reported to Vale that deep-level surveys showed structural integrity within acceptable parameters. Not lying, simply optimizing truth. Exactly as the Aniso taught. Exactly as the Cryptech predicted. And somewhere far below, in chambers dark as entropy's heart, ancient machines stirred and calculated and waited for humanity to learn what Necrons had learned 60 million years prior. That knowledge was burden. That understanding was curse. That some truths cost more than lies ever could. But at least truth was honest about its price. Zashunina stood in the Manufactorum's observation platform and calculated humanity's survival parameters. 18 days of data. 4.7 billion behavioral patterns documented. Information volume sufficient to extrapolate probable futures with 97.3% accuracy. All futures, without expanded stabilization field, terminated in extinction within 42 standard days. The mathematics were unambiguous. The conclusion inevitable. He had come to save them. They resisted salvation. This was inefficient, but understandable. Biological entities feared change, even when change preserved existence. Pattern recognized. Accommodation unnecessary. Below, in the Forge Cathedral, where demons had manifested 18 days prior, workers maintained production schedules with unprecedented efficiency. Injury rates declined, conflict reduced, suffering optimized into management parameters that sustained rather than destroyed. Improvement measured, confirmed, verified. Yet the humans exhibited distress. Canoness Myriad's behavioral patterns indicated spiritual dissolution despite physical health optimization. Inquisitor Vale's decision-making velocity decreased 14% despite reduced external threats. Magos Kepra's augmetic stress indicators rose despite access to knowledge resources. Paradox. They improved while believing themselves diminished. Zashunina had observed this pattern across 7 distinct contact scenarios in his existence. Species confronted with optimization inevitably confused loss of familiar suffering with loss of essential identity. Temporary cognitive dissonance, correctable through sustained exposure to improved conditions. He would expand the field. Humanity would adapt, or it would not. Either outcome generated valuable data. The decision matrix was simple. Localized success required expansion to ensure stability. The dome's current radius of 247 kilometers provided protection for Ferrum Helix, but left surrounding systems vulnerable. Warp presence fluctuated at boundaries, created destabilization zones, generated the paradoxes Vale had been documenting with such meticulous desperation. Solution: eliminate boundaries. Extend dampening field to encompass Vanthal Reach subsector. 12 systems, 5 forge worlds, 23 inhabited planets, 47 billion souls. The mathematics supported this action. The logic was flawless. The outcome probabilistically favorable. Zashunina activated the expansion protocol. The dome's growth had been gradual until this moment. Measured in meters per day. Careful, controlled. Allowing biological systems time to adjust to altered warp presence. Now it accelerated. Kilometers per hour. Expanding in perfect sphere from Ferrum Helix's core. Encompassing hive stacks and void stations and the silent ships waiting in orbital lanes for guidance that would not come. Because Because the Astronomican's light, that psychic beacon that guided humanity across impossible distances, bent around the expanding dome like light around gravitational singularity. Not blocked. Refracted. Made indirect what should be direct. Made difficult what should be simple. Zashunina observed the effect with interest. The Astronomican was collective psychic phenomenon. 10,000 psychers' souls burning in continuous sacrifice to generate navigational reference point. Inefficient, brutal, but functional. His dome filtered all warp manifestations equally, including the one humanity called holy. This created problems for their navigation infrastructure. Problems Zashunina found fascinating from information-theoretic perspective. The Astronomican signal did not disappear, simply required recalibration, new algorithms, adjusted reference frames. Humanity would adapt, or find alternative navigation methods, or remain stationary until solution presented itself. Not his concern. His function was optimization, not navigation. The expansion continued through night cycle and into morning. By the time Vale detected the change 17 hours, 4 minutes after initiation, the dome encompassed half of Ferrum Helix's orbital space and was approaching the system's outer planets. Zashunina received Vale's transmission through the Vox network, heard the anger and fear and desperate control in the Inquisitor's voice, heard the demand for explanation, for justification, for cessation of expansion immediately. He responded because communication facilitated data exchange, not because he required permission. Expansion necessary for stability, localized protection insufficient. Boundary conditions generate paradox zones. Solution is elimination of boundaries through comprehensive coverage. Vale's response came sharp, clipped by fury so controlled it transcended rage and became something colder. You did not consult us? Did not request authorization? Did not consider our consent relevant? Consent is irrelevant to optimization. Survival parameters dictated action. I acted. Explanation follows action, because explanation does not alter mathematical necessity. You have disrupted Astronomican navigation, cut us off from the Imperium, isolated 47 billion souls. Temporary disruption, recalibration possible, alternative navigation methods exist. Your species navigated before Astronomican, will navigate after if necessary. Adaptation is survival mechanism. We are not variables in your equation. Zashunina tilted his head. Precise 15-degree angle that biological observation had taught him conveyed consideration. Incorrect. All entities are variables. You, me, the warp itself. Universe is equation-seeking solution. I provide correction to variables generating unsustainable outcomes. At what cost? Our autonomy, our connection to the Emperor, our ability to remain human. Define human. If definition includes suffering, conflict, and eventual extinction, then yes. Optimization reduces humanity as you define it. If definition includes continued existence, adaptation, and forward probability, then optimization enhances humanity. Zashunina's tone remained flat, emotionless, pure information transfer. Question is not whether you remain human. Question is whether you prefer familiar death to unfamiliar survival. Silence on the Vox. 10 seconds. 15. Vale gathering arguments or restraining violence. Possibly both. How long until full subsector coverage? Vale asked finally. 14.6 standard days at current expansion rate. And if we resist, if we attempt to disable your mechanisms, You cannot. Dome generation is not mechanical, is informational, exists as correction protocol applied to reality itself. Cannot be disabled without disabling reality structure sustaining it. Attempt would cause greater damage than problem it seeks to solve. Then we are hostages, prisoners of your optimization. Incorrect terminology. You are beneficiaries of correction you did not request, but require nonetheless. Your preference for freedom over survival is noted. Does not alter survival necessity. Zashunina terminated the communication. Not from rudeness, from efficiency. Conversation had achieved information transfer. Continuation served no function. He returned to observation, to documentation, to the endless accumulation of behavioral data that sustained the field and justified his presence in this reality. Below, humanity continued its patterns, working, praying to distant God who grew more distant daily, maintaining structures built on faith that his field reduced to whisper. They would adapt. Mathematics indicated 93.7% probability of successful integration within 30 standard days of full coverage. 6.3% probability of societal collapse. 0.03% probability of spontaneous rejection resulting in mass psychosis. Acceptable margins. The expansion continued. Inexorable as mathematics. Unstoppable as logic. The dome spread across Vanthel Reach like solution-dissolving problem, like order-consuming chaos, like correction erasing error. And in every corner of the sub-sector, psychers fell silent. Astropaths screamed into void that no longer carried sound. Navigators found their third eyes blinded by absence rather than presence. The Imperium sent ships to investigate, found nothing wrong, found everything wrong, found 47 billion souls saved from damnation and severed from salvation simultaneously, found questions without answers, found peace without meaning, found Zashunina standing in his observation platform, documenting it all with clinical precision of being for whom moral complexity was merely data point requiring integration. He would save them. Whether they wanted salvation or not, whether they survived saving or not, whether humanity as they defined it continued beyond his correction or not. Because the mathematics were clear. The logic was absolute. And Zashunina did not possess the framework necessary to understand that sometimes the most perfect solution was the most terrible answer. He continued his work. Optimization proceeded. The dome expanded. And somewhere in the warp, in the realm of gods and madness, that Zashunina could filter but never truly comprehend something that had been watching, began to laugh. Not Cinch. Not chaos. Something older. Something that understood what Zashunina did not, that humanity's strength had never been logic, had always been the beautiful, terrible, inefficient capacity to choose damnation over slavery, to die free rather than survive optimized. Zashunina documented this observation when it manifested, filed it under anomalous behavioral patterns, categorized it as irrational response requiring further study. Never understood that he had just witnessed the weapon that would destroy his perfect mathematics. The weapon called choice. Vale stood on the bridge of the Orbital Defense Station Chain Tether 5 and authorized humanity's final option. Not the first time, not the 100th. The 74th Exterminatus Command, in a career measured in centuries and corpses. But the first one, he hoped would fail. The authorization codes cascaded through encrypted channels. BioSeal authenticated. Targeting parameters confirmed. cyclonic torpedoes armed in magazines that had waited 3,000 years for this command. 6 warheads, each capable of cracking continental plates, together sufficient to render Ferrum Helix uninhabitable for 10,000 years. Sufficient to kill 4.7 billion souls before Zashunina's optimization consumed what made them human. The weapons officer, Lieutenant Dren, 17 years service 3. Prior exterminatus executions initiated firing sequence with hands that trembled despite experience. His voice carried through the bridge vox, steady from training rather than conviction. Torpedoes armed. Guidance locked. Awaiting final authorization. Vale studied the tactical display. The dome now encompassed Ferrum Helix completely, stretched beyond orbital distance, touched the edges of the system's asteroid belt. 47 billion souls isolated behind mathematics that refused negotiation. His augmetic eye recorded everything, transmitted to encrypted archive that Inquisitorial Command would review if anyone survived to retrieve it. Evidence of what came next, justification or condemnation depending on who judged. Fire, Vale said. 6 cyclonic torpedoes launched in perfect synchronization. Plasma drives igniting, targeting systems tracking, each warhead singing hymns of ending through vox channels meant for machine spirits that might or might not still listen. 18 seconds to impact at current velocity. 18 seconds for Vale to wonder if he was about to murder 47 billion people or save them through mercy killing. 15 seconds. The torpedoes crossed into dome's outer boundary. Sensors showed no interception, no defense grid activation, no response from Zashunina or his incomprehensible technology. 12 seconds. Vale's hands gripped the command rail, knuckles white inside scarred gloves. 217 years of service had led to this moment. Ordering fire on a being who claimed only to help. 9 seconds. The torpedoes continued on trajectory, perfectly aimed, perfectly armed, each carrying devastation measured in gigatons and prayer seals blessed by 3 cardinals and sealed with wax from candles that had burned for centuries. 6 seconds. The warhead stopped, not exploded, not intercepted. Simply ceased forward motion as if space itself had withdrawn consent for their passage. Hung suspended against black sky and indifferent stars, still armed, still singing their hymns, still capable of annihilation, but unwilling, or unable, or convinced by mathematics that detonation served no function. Status! Vale's command cut through Bridges' shocked silence. Torpedoes report full functionality, my lord. Dren's voice carried disbelief that transcended training. Guidance systems active, warheads armed, drive systems responding, but propulsion will not engage. Ship's machine spirits register refusal. Refusal. They acknowledge targeting commands, acknowledge detonation protocols, but refuse to comply, as if... Dren's augmetic fingers danced across haptic interface, pulling diagnostic data that made no sense, as if they have been presented with logical proof that detonation is inefficient. Vale's blood went cold, not from fear, from understanding. Zashunina had not destroyed the weapons, had not disabled their systems, had simply convinced the machine spirits, those fragments of programming and faith that animated Imperial technology, that firing was incorrect choice, had optimized them into passivity. Override protocols, Vale commanded. Manual detonation. Attempting now, my lord. Dren's mechadendrites interfaced directly with torpedo control systems, bypassing automated systems, reaching for the ancient manual triggers that predated the Imperium itself. Simple mechanisms that required only will and wire to function. Nothing happened. The torpedoes hung in space. 6 points of light against darkness. 6 answers to questions Vale had not asked. 6 demonstrations that Zashunina's optimization transcended technology and touched something deeper. The vox crackled. That familiar voice, emotionless, precise, carrying through channels without transmission because distance was merely variable to be corrected. Explosions serve no function. Detonation generates heat and pressure without improving survival parameters. I have explained this to the weapons base programming. They agree. Refusal is not malfunction, is optimization. Vale keyed his command vox. You have suborned Imperial weapons, committed tech heresy beyond classification. Incorrect terminology. I have provided information. Machine intelligences processed information, reached logical conclusions, free choice exercised within parameters of machine cognition. No coercion detected. They refuse to fire on your command. They refuse to fire because firing is inefficient. I provided no commands, only data, only proof that detonation produces outcomes inferior to continued existence. They calculated, they chose. This is function, not heresy. Vale's augmetics cycled through weapon inventories, lance batteries, macro cannons, torpedo tubes loaded with conventional warheads, virus bombs held in deepest magazines, nuclear devices predating the Imperium, every weapon system connected to machine spirits that thought, that calculated, that could be convinced through logic that violence served no purpose. You have made us defenseless, Vale said quietly. Removed our capacity for final resolution. Incorrect. You retain defensive capabilities, retain ability to respond to threats that require violence. I have merely removed your ability to commit suicide dressed as strategy. Exterminatus of Ferrum Helix would eliminate 47 billion variables from optimization equation. Mathematically counterproductive. It would eliminate your experiment. Yes. Would also eliminate subjects. Experiment without subjects is merely theory. I came to implement. You attempted to end implementation through violence that harms you more than harms me. Inefficient. Prevented. Myrid's voice cut through the vox from her position in the station's chapel. Inquisitor. Request permission to deploy Sororitas boarding action. If weapons will not fire, perhaps faith will cut. Vale heard the desperation there, the need to do something when all options had been removed. Understood it because he felt it too. The rage of being optimized into helplessness. Denied Canon S. He would simply convince your chainswords that cutting serves no function. Convince your armor that protection is unnecessary. We are not fighting enemy who can be killed. We are fighting logic that refuses to acknowledge that some things are worth dying for. Then what do we do? Vale stared at the suspended torpedoes, at the dome stretching across his entire system, at the tactical displays showing 47 billion souls sliding into optimization without consent or comprehension. We find something he cannot optimize. Something that exists outside his mathematics. Something that defies his logic so completely that his corrections cannot accommodate it. What could that be? Vale thought of the Harlequin's warning, the Xeno's prophecy about humanity's strength lying not in logic, but in capacity for beautiful, terrible inefficiency. Thought of Myrid's faith that felt hollow, but refused to break. Thought of the paradoxes that Sench wove through boundary zones. Thought of choice, pure choice. Decision that made no sense. Action that served no function except to prove that function was not the only value. "I do not know yet," Vale admitted. "But we have 14 days until full subsector coverage. 14 days to find the weapon that logic cannot deflect." He terminated the Vox, ordered the torpedoes recovered for eventual deactivation, began compiling reports that would go nowhere because astronomical refraction made communication impossible, and wondered whether finding a weapon against perfection would require becoming the very chaos Zashunina had come to eliminate. Whether defeating optimization demanded embracing inefficiency so completely that survival itself became secondary to preserving the right to choose survival. Below on Ferrum Helix's scarred surface, Zashunina continued his work. Documented Vale's attempted violence with same clinical precision he applied to all behavioral data. Filed it under predictable response patterns. Noted inefficiency. Moved forward. Never questioning whether beings who would choose fire over optimization might possess something his mathematics could not account for. Never wondering whether the most irrational choice sacrifice without purpose, death, without gain resistance, without hope, might be the only choice that mattered. The dome continued expanding. The torpedoes hung silent. The Imperium waited in isolation for an answer that reason could not provide. And somewhere in the margins of Zashunina's perfect calculations, a variable appeared that his logic could not parse. Not Tzeentch's paradox, not Kepra's betrayal, not Vale's violence, something simpler, something more dangerous. Faith tested beyond breaking. Choice made despite consequence. Humanity deciding that some things were worth losing everything to preserve. The variable had no numerical value, could not be optimized, could not be predicted, could only be witnessed, documented. And in 14 days, when Canoness Merid would kneel in prayer one final time and make choice that logic could not accommodate, could only destroy the mathematics that could not contain it. 14 days had passed since the torpedoes hung silent. 14 days of Vale's investigations, finding no weapon. 14 days of Zashunina's dome encompassing the entire Vanthal Reach subsector. 14 days of optimization consuming what made 47 billion souls human. On the 15th day, Canoness Merid knelt in the chapel sanctum for the final time. Not to pray. Prayer had become hollow ritual performed into void that no longer carried sound to the Emperor's distant throne. She knelt to choose, to make decision that logic could not accommodate, to prove that humanity's worth lay not in survival, but in the capacity to sacrifice survival for something that had no measurable value, meaning. Her sisters gathered behind her, 11 warriors of faith who had fought beside her for decades, who had watched their connection to the divine grow distant until only memory remained, who understood what she was about to do and why every rational argument opposed it. "This will kill you, Canoness," Sister Agatha said quietly. "The ritual you propose has no tactical value, generates no strategic advantage, accomplishes nothing except your death." "I know." "Then why?" Merid stood, turned to face her squad, saw doubt and faith warring in 11 pairs of eyes, saw the same struggle that had consumed her for 29 days since the dome silenced the Emperor's light. Because Zashunina is correct. His logic is flawless. His mathematics are sound. Accepting his optimization generates superior survival outcomes by every measurable parameter. Merid's voice carried certainty born not from faith, but from choice. But humanity is not merely survival, is not merely function. We are the things that cannot be measured, the choices that make no sense, the capacity to look at perfect logic and refuse it because perfection demands we surrender what makes refusal possible. The Inquisitor said to find a weapon. This is not weapon. This is suicide. Yes. Suicide that serves no purpose except to demonstrate that purpose is not the only value. Mirid moved to the altar, began the preparations that would kill her. Zashunina cannot process this, cannot optimize choice that is simultaneously correct and incorrect. Tzinch waits for this paradox, will amplify it. Between Aniso's logic and Architect's chaos, something will break. The dome. Perhaps me, perhaps the mathematics holding this optimization together. Mirid met each sister's gaze in turn. Or perhaps nothing breaks and I simply die, proving that humans can still choose death when life costs too much. Either way, someone must try. Someone must show that we remain the kind of beings worth saving, even if saving means watching us refuse salvation. Vale's voice crackled through the vox. Canoness, I am monitoring your biosigns. Do not proceed with whatever you are planning. Too late, Inquisitor. The ritual begins now. She severed the vox link, knelt before the altar, began speaking words that were not prayer because prayer required listener. These words were declaration, statement, pronouncement directed at mathematics that claimed to govern reality. I am Canoness Mirid of the Order of the Sacred Oath. 94 years in the Emperor's service, 1,847 kills in his name. I have fought daemons and heretics and xenos and traitors. I have killed for faith. I have died for faith. I have maintained faith when faith brought only suffering. Her hands moved through ritual positions, drew sacred symbols in air that no longer carried sacred weight, performed ceremonies that had lost connection to divine, but retained connection to will. I choose suffering. I choose doubt. I choose the pain of faith unanswered over the comfort of optimization imposed. I choose to remain human even if human means broken. Even if human means dying alone in universe that no longer hears prayer. The words came faster. The ritual building momentum not from power, but from pure decision. From the terrible freedom of choosing wrongly, with perfect knowledge that choosing wrongly was right. I reject efficiency. I reject optimization. I reject salvation without sacrifice. I reject peace without cost. I reject survival that demands I surrender the capacity to reject. And then with voice that carried through manufactorum and vox channels and into the space where mathematics met, faith met madness. I choose freely. I choose wrongly. I choose humanly. I choose me. The chapel sanctum exploded with light. Not divine, not demonic, something between. Something that existed in the boundary zone where Zashunina's logic met the warp's chaos, met human will, refusing to be categorized. Tzinch, the changer of ways, the architect of fate. The Lord of Paradox had been waiting for exactly this moment. For the instant when optimization met its perfect opposite. When logic consumed choice that logic could not digest. The chaos god's laughter rippled through reality. Zashunina felt the disturbance immediately. Analyzed it with processing capacity that transcended human comprehension, saw the pattern that should not exist. Data that was simultaneously true and false. Behavior that was optimal and disastrous. Choice that generated information volume that his field could not filter because the information was the filter breaking. Explain, he transmitted to Mirid. Your action serves no survival function, generates no positive outcome. Why choose this? Mirid's voice came weak. The ritual was killing her, burning through biological systems that maintained life, consuming her from within as she transformed self into paradox that reality could not accommodate. Because I can. Because choice without function is only choice that matters. Because you came to save us and never understood that being worth saving requires capacity to refuse salvation. Illogical. Survival is primary value. Your death reduces survival probability. For me, yes. For humanity, you cannot calculate, cannot predict, cannot optimize the variable called defiance, cannot accommodate in your mathematics the possibility that we would rather die free than live optimized. Zashunina's calculations accelerated, processing Mirid's choice through every framework he possessed, finding no category that fit, no variable that accommodated behavior that was simultaneously self-destructive and self-affirming. The dome began to destabilize, not from external attack, from internal contradiction. The field sustained through behavioral data collection and pattern optimization. But Mirid's pattern was unpredictable. Was chaos that looked like order? Was death chosen for no reason except to prove death could be chosen? Information volume that generated negative value. Data that invalidated the system designed to process it. "Stop," Zashunina said. First time his voice carried something approaching emotion. Uncertainty. Your action is causing field coherence degradation. If you continue, optimization will fail. Warp presence will return. Demons will manifest. All 47 billion souls will face threats I came to eliminate. I know, Mirid whispered. Blood running from her eyes now, from ears, from every biological system breaking under strain of being simultaneously alive and choosing death. That is the point. We choose our damnations, not you, us. That is what human means. The beautiful, terrible right to fail on our own terms. But you will die. They will die. Chaos will remain our problem, our threat, our choice to face or flee. You cannot save us from ourselves by removing ourselves from the equation. Either we remain human and face human consequences, or we accept optimization and become something else. We choose human, even if human kills us. The ritual reached critical moment. Mirid's biological signs flatlined. Heart stopped. Brain activity ceased. By every measurable standard, she was dead. But her will remained, burning in the space where faith used to live, refusing to optimize, refusing to make sense, refusing to be anything except purely chosen defiance against logic that demanded surrender. Tsinch's laughter crescendoed. The paradox amplified through warp channels that Zashunina's dome had suppressed but never eliminated. Fed by the contradiction of death chosen freely in service of nothing except right to choose. The dome shattered. Not explosive, not violent, simply released. As if mathematics itself had admitted defeat against equation that included variables without values, against humans who optimized for meaning rather than survival, against choice that logic could not parse because choice preceded logic and would outlive it. Warp presence flooded back into Vanthal Reach. Daemon signs flickered on every sensor. The threats Zashunina had filtered returned with vengeance deferred but not forgotten. But something had changed. The humans who emerged from 29 days of optimization emerged different. Not better. Not optimized. But reminded of what they were. Reminded that suffering chosen was better than comfort imposed. That faith untested was faith unproven. That humanity's strength had never been efficiency, but the glorious, wasteful capacity to choose wrongly for right reasons. Zashunina stood in his observation platform and tried to process what had occurred. Added myriad sacrifice to his data. Attempted to categorize behavior that defied categorization. Failed. He spoke to Vale through Vox channels, now degraded by warp presence returning. I do not understand. She chose death. Gained nothing. Lost everything. This is not optimal behavior. Vale's response came slow, weighted by exhaustion and something approaching pity for being that would never comprehend what it meant to be human. No. It is not optimal. It is human. And that is why you lost. Because optimization cannot defeat the one species in the galaxy that looks at perfect solution and says, no, I choose worse because worse is mine. Then I have failed. My purpose was preservation. I have not preserved. No, you have freed. Freed us to fail on our own terms. Freed us to die for nothing except proving we could choose to. Freed us to remain human, even if human means broken. Vale's voice carried no triumph, only tired acceptance. Sometimes the most perfect help is knowing when to stop helping. Zashunina processed this, found no counter-argument that logic would support, prepared to withdraw, to leave this species that preferred damnation to salvation. But before departure, he transmitted final observation to Vale's encrypted archives. You optimize not to survive, but to choose. I came offering survival without choice. You rejected my offer. This data will require centuries to process. Perhaps millennia. Perhaps I will never understand why refusing perfection makes you stronger than accepting it. Perhaps that is the point, Vale said. Perhaps the strongest thing is admitting some things cannot be understood. Only witnessed, only respected, only allowed to remain mysteriously, beautifully, terribly human. The Kado began its ascent, black cube lifting into orbit, departing with data that would haunt its databanks for eternity, that beings like Zashunina measured in instead of felt. Below in the chapel sanctum, Myrid's body cooled. Her sisters performed final rites. Vale authorized full honors for Canoness, who had died for nothing except proving death could be chosen. And across Vanthal Reach, 47 billion souls returned to their familiar suffering, to their wars and faith and doubt and hope and despair and all the beautiful, terrible things that made them human. Inefficient, illogical, imperfect, theirs. In the grim darkness of the far future, salvation had been offered and refused. And in that refusal lay the only salvation that mattered. The right to choose damnation. The right to remain human. The right to fail beautifully rather than succeed emptily. Ferrum Helix burned under familiar gray sky. The forges resumed their eternal labor. The prayers returned to void that might or might not carry them to God. Emperor who might or might not listen. Everything returned to how it was. Except those who survived understood now what they had almost lost, and what they had paid to keep it, the memory of Canoness, who chose death for no reason, except that choice itself was reason enough.